Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I can't actually see the back, but I'm hoping that everybody at the back of the room can hear me. I'm going to ask the stupid question now. If there's anybody at the back of the room who can't hear me, please shout out now. Welcome to the LPFA Members Forum. My name is John Preston. I'm the chair of the LPFA, and although I took over as chair almost 2 years ago now, on beginning of 2020, because of COVID and our inability to hold this event this last year, this is the first opportunity I've had to welcome our members to this forum, so I'm delighted to see so many of you here today. I should mention that we are also for the first time transmitting this live, and we will be recording it, so please do be aware that we are recording this event and there will be an opportunity for people who weren't able to join us today to catch up with it later. I'm afraid I need to start with just a few, let me just introduce the speakers, and then I will give you a few housekeeping points. We have 4 speakers today. On the stage we have Robert Branner, the Chief Executive Officer of the LPFA, Richard Tomlinson, the Chief Investment Officer of our investment managers, LPPI, and Joe Derbyshire, the Managing Director of our administrators, LPPA. And we will be joined later on by Deborah Alsina, the Chief Executive Officer of Independent Age, a leading UK charity. I'll give you more details of Deborah just before she speaks. But let me just do, as I say, a few housekeeping points. Obviously, social distancing rules have been removed, but nonetheless, we're very conscious that a number of you are still very sensitive to COVID issues. So out of respect for and consideration of others, can I request that people do wear masks in the public places within the venue? We don't have any fire alarms planned today, so in the hopefully extremely unlikely event that a fire alarm goes, please do exit the hall at the fire exits, which are clearly marked. We are captioning this event, and this will be transmitted on the screen. So for those of you who may need to sit nearer to the screen, please do take the opportunity to move now. There is also an audio loop available for those of you that need it, and if you do need it, please set your hearing device to setting T. You may already have noticed that there is no phone reception in this hall, but you are able to access free Wi-Fi, and I'll give you details of that in a second. For lunch, please do access through the halls through the entrances at the centre of the hall rather than the ones at the side. And do please take the opportunity to visit our exhibits in the foyer. We've got 2 exhibitors today, Independent Age and LPPA, our administrators, and they will be there to answer any questions you have during the course of the day. As I say, there is free Wi-Fi. Please tune to SC Free, and floor plans are the venue are in your pack. As I said, we have a significant number of people attending virtually today, so just a few housekeeping points for you. If you wish to raise a question, please do use the chat box on the main section to interact with the other attendees, make comments or ask questions. If you're having any technical difficulty for those virtual attendees, on the screen is shown the way in which you can achieve help. And if you really do have any difficulties and you aren't able to tune in, then as I say, we are recording this event, so you will have the opportunity to pick up on it later. However, I have to be clear, sadly, we're not going to be able to we won't be allowed to pick up any issues of personal pension issues during the course of today. So if anybody does have any questions relating to their own personal pension, then the address is on the screen for that at our administrators, LPPA. Similarly, as I said, there are LPPA representatives in the foyer. So if anybody has any specific questions about their own personal position, then please do pick that up with LPPA representatives later. Just briefly to take you through today's agenda. In a few moments, I'll hand over to Robert Branner, the Chief Executive, to take you through a review of the year. We've then got a session on the investment performance of the fund from Richard Tomlinson. Joe Derbyshire will take us through the administration update on the way in which we administer the fund. Robert will come back to talk about responsible investment and climate change. We're then going to have a short break of just 15 minutes, and I would ask if people could please try and come back fairly promptly after that. We'll have a Q&A session. I should mention we've already had a huge number of questions, but we will try and have an opportunity for questions from the floor as well. And then at 12:45, our guest speaker will be giving her presentation, followed by lunch and an opportunity to visit the exhibits in the foyer. Before I hand over to Robert, I would just like to take you through a quick key messages, highlights of the year. Firstly, I'd like to, as I say, thank everybody for submitting so many questions. We've had over 200 questions so far across a huge range of issues, and I do hope that the following sessions will go some way to addressing some of those questions. But as I mentioned, please do recall that we won't be able to get into any personal issues. So if you've got member-specific queries, please do address them to LPPA representatives later. Richard Tomlinson will go into more detail on the financial performance of the scheme. But at this stage, let me just say that despite the COVID-related stock market's ups and downs, the fund is in good shape, it's strong financial health, and it's financially sustainable. We were valued at 6.8 billion as at the 31st of March 2021, up from 5.9 billion a year before, and we estimate that we are somewhere over £7 billion today. As of last March, we were funded to 108%. In other words, we have more than 100% of the money we need to pay all the pension obligations that have accrued to date. However, our fund member survey, which Robert will talk more about later, did show that many of our members are understandably worried about their financial future. Basically, you all want to know that your pensions are secure. So I wanted to take this opportunity to reassure all our members about that. The Local Government Pension Scheme, the LGPS, is a statutory scheme with benefits set out in law, making it very secure. The LGPS is a defined benefit scheme, so it's very different to a defined contribution scheme, which now dominate the private sector and in which many of our friends and family are probably enrolled. As the LGPS is a defined benefit scheme, the benefits built up are guaranteed and inflation-proofed based on what's specified in the regulations rather than the value of the fund's assets. Indeed, the key priority of the LPFA board is to ensure that all of our members receive the benefits to which, to which they are entitled. Another issue which I know concerns members is the quality of the administration of our fund, and Joe Derbyshire, the Managing Director of our administrators, LPPA, will be speaking about the progress her organisation has made in this area later. Ensuring that the LPFA is a responsible investor in general, and in relation to climate change in particular, is a hugely important issue to the LPFA board, and I know from our member survey that this concern is shared by our members. The impact of climate change is a significant financial risk to the fund, so I'm delighted to share with you that on the 20th of September, together with other leading investors, we formally announced a commitment to become a net zero fund, and Robert will be talking about this in more detail later on. We've been making good progress in reducing our investment in polluting companies since we introduced a climate change policy in 2016, and our net zero aspiration is a logical next step. I'd encourage everyone to visit our new website to find out more about our plans and the work that we've done to date. We're also continuing to play our part in supporting London's future. The London Fund, which is a collaboration between us, the LPFA, the London Collective Investment Vehicle, which is a grouping of the pension funds of the London boroughs, and LPPI, is also going from strength to strength. The London Fund was created as a way of investing in projects that will produce the investment return that we need to meet our pension obligations, but will also support London's infrastructure like affordable housing, green energy, or low-carbon travel. We think of this as achieving a double bottom line, in that it allows the LPFA to support London's future growth and helps us to support the transition to a low-carbon economy, whilst also providing the necessary income to pay our pensions to our members. It was therefore really exciting that last month Haringey Council announced a £45 million investment in the fund, bringing the total investment in the London Fund up to £195 million in assets. We're hopeful that some other London boroughs may also invest over the coming few months. Of course, responsible investment isn't just about climate change, and Robert, as I say, will talk more about this later. We know that we're not perfect, and we do have more to do, but I believe that we are making strong progress, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the LPFA team and our partners LPPI and LPPA for all the fantastic work they've done over the months of the pandemic. Let me now introduce Robert Branner, the Chief Executive Officer of the LPFA, to provide a more detailed review of the year.
Good morning, and can I offer my welcome to the Fund Member Forum this year as well. So, the year in review. I'm going to start off by summarising the structure of LPFA and our constituent parts, because certainly in the feedback that we've had over the last 18 months and from the member survey, some of you have expressed some confusion about how we operate and who does what. So before pooling, there was only really the LPFA. So you'll see on the diagram, we're in the centre of the box. Underneath is LPPI, the investment business, and A, the administration business. And like the other 88 England and Wales local government pensions funds, we all managed our own assets and communicated to members and did our administration ourselves. So that was back in 2016-17. When pooling took place, all of the 88 funds moved their assets into one of 8 pools, and our pool is the local pensions partnership, represented today by Richard for investment and Joe for administration. So the LPFA is the fund, LPPI provides our administration and our investment, and as I'll explain in the next 10-15 minutes, the LPFA fund itself has been reinvesting in staff and resources as we brought some work back in-house, but essentially we still use LPP for our administration and investment, but we're doing more things ourselves. So what do we do? What do we test ourselves against? What are our kind of objectives? And as you'd understand, there are 5 principal things that we look at. Paying benefits, including pensions, to sustainably manage the fund and its risks, to be well run, to collaborate and learn with others, and to invest responsibly and for the long term. And these themes will come through, hopefully, for the rest of today and during the next 10 minutes or so. So, in essence, I will take you through each individual item, but there will be a separate session at the end of today's sessions on responsible investment, which will give you a bit more detail as we go through that. So don't get too hung up about the slides, because the slides will actually be available afterwards, but I will just highlight some key messages that I want to share with you. For example, you'll see that the membership of the fund as at the end of March this year was about 91,000 members. Today we have about 94,000 members, so the fund is pretty well populated. There are about 35,000 pensioners or dependents. There are 28,000 deferreds and roughly 20 or 21,000 people actively contributing and paying into the fund. We have 137 employers as at the end of March. There are about 134, 135 now, and they're a very diverse set of organisations, ranging from the Greater London Authority through to organisations like the British Film Institute or lots of universities or third sector organisations. And you'll see at the very end, we paid out £217 million worth of pensions last year, or roughly the run rate is about £22, £23 million per year. So, to be able to continue to pay that £217 million a year, we obviously need to invest our money and your contributions wisely so that we get enough income and we generate enough returns to cover those payments. Our return last year was about 16.6%, which is quite a good return for the 1 year, although the benchmark was slightly higher than that. But it's worth pointing out that actuarially speaking, so in terms of the actuary valuing what our liabilities are and how much we need to generate to cover those over a 3-year period, that rate is 5.3. So the 16.6 1 year was pretty good, and we are tracking the benchmarks for 3 and 5 years. So the investment performance, which Richard will talk about later, is pretty healthy in the context of 1, 3 and 5 years. The overall value of the fund, because we're about to publish our accounts this afternoon, so if you get a chance to look at the website today or the next few days, you'll see the annual report. You'll see the accounts going online, and the fund's value since the 31st of March last year has gone up by £999 million. It's a very interesting number, but it has gone up £999 million. So your fund today is worth about 6.8, 6.9 billion, if not a little bit more. So the third thing that I introduced was to be a well-run and transparent pension fund. And you'll see on here, we have some stats around the cost per member is going up. It's going up partly because of increased regulatory pressures on us. There's a lot of legislation that we have to deal with, and increasing volumes of that. We're also taking back some staff, as I said, and some services that LPP used to operate for us. Complaints have come down. Service levels have been consistently 99% for a considerable period of time now. And you'll see in the bottom right of this particular slide, not only has the cost per member compared to 2016 when we set up LPP dramatically reduced for administration from £58 to £24, but in total, by having LPPA, we have saved about £13.5, £14 million in administration costs by using LPPA. So the fourth thing is collaboration with other organisations, and that's not just us saying what we do and what people can learn from us, but us learning from them. And you'll see some of the headlines, and John mentioned earlier about the net zero commitment we made. We're doing that in partnership with other organisations. We're not just doing that on our own, but to help share some of those messages, because some of the feedback that you shared with us in 2019 was you want more communication, you want more detail on the website. We have just the last few months relaunched the website, so hopefully members can look at that or have been looking at that and are seeing much more straightforward language, much more detail on performance, much more detail on what we do, much more detail on collaboration. And as I'll talk about in a second, feedback from you will get reflected in some of our messaging, be it via social media, newsletters or the website, so there will be more engagement with members, but the website has been refreshed, and I'd be particularly interested at lunch for any feedback anyone has on how they're finding that. So, to continue the theme of collaboration, and again, John mentioned this very briefly in his opening remarks, something which I'm particularly pleased to see and to have contributed partly to is this London fund which we've established. So if you go back to sustainability and collaboration as being two very central themes for LPFA, what we've managed to do is get LPPI, so our own pool, to work alongside LSIV, who are the other pool that look after about 30 boroughs or councils in London, and ask those two organisations to jointly work to provide a framework and a vehicle for us to do some investments. And those investments are principally in the Greater London area. Those investments are things like opportunities in transport, green energy, green recovery, housing. It's a mixture of things for Londoners that you can see and touch and see some value to, but also, as John said, it has to produce a return for us, and it has to produce a decent return for us, but we want something that was for the Greater London community. And I'm delighted to say that that's been in operation for some time now. We've put about £150 million into that. John mentioned Haringey has contributed about 45 million, and 3 or 4 other London boroughs are also interested in contributing. So if we get about 300, 400, 500 million pounds into that, we will do some good in the wider community as well as make a return for you and the rest of the members. Since I've been here in 2018, we haven't really gone into awards or done huge amounts of external engagement. So it was quite nice to get mentioned by this pensions magazine. It's called Investments and Pensions Europe. And this quote is from one of the judges who particularly noted that in terms of innovation, in terms of getting large investment managers to work together, this was quite impressive and quite pleasing to see. So although London Fund is relatively small at the minute for a £7 billion pension fund, it's particularly pleasing that we're investing in sustainable things, we're generating a return, but we are collaborating with others, which is central to what we want to do. GLIL, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on GLIL, but GLIL is essentially the organisation that does a lot of collaboration for, and if that's them on the phone, I'll spend longer next time. But GLIL do a lot of infrastructure investment for them, but in the theme of collaboration, you'll see on here, Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire, Merseyside, Lancashire and London all contribute to this. So it's another collaborative vehicle for maybe £2.5 billion worth of assets, which LPPI are trying to deploy across big major infrastructure projects to get a return for us. It's another example where LPFA is continuing to look to collaborate, learn from and learn with other organisations. So just turning to feedback and engagement, and particularly mindful from the 2019 member forum where you showed you wanted some more engagement and some more feedback. We did a survey back in May, and thank you to everybody in the room who did contribute. We sent out pretty much on the email population we have. So 94,000 members, we've got 34,000 email addresses. We would like more, but we went to 34,000 members for a reasonably detailed survey. And most other pension funds that we speak to get responses to member surveys in the hundreds. I am absolutely delighted to say that about 62% of the 34,000 people opened the email, but more importantly, about 3,500 people responded. They answered the questions we asked, and they gave us some really good feedback about what's important to you, what you like, what you don't like, and where we can do better and we can evolve our service to you. So thematically, so what are the main things that came out of that survey? 4 things. Engagement. Obviously, it might make logic that a lot of correspondence, a lot of feedback came from the pensioner part of the fund. There's a lot of commentary on responsible investment, which is why we're going to have a very brief 10-15 minute section at the end about what we're doing and what we've done since 2019 at the end of these sessions. You wanted slightly more personalised communication. You want more comms. You want more information from us, particularly on calculations or how do I do something. And finally, there was something on what LGPS does, what LPFA does, what LPPI does, and what LPPA do. And that's an awful lot of L's, as you know. So partly today's been themed around different organisations all working for the same goal, which is to support you, our members and our employers. So just briefly, some feedback, what your perception of the LPFA fund was. So there's just a schematic up in terms of the main words that came out from the 3,500 responses. The most common words that we saw were responsible, trustworthy, and then well run. So that was good, positive feedback. Although having said that, there were approximately 15% of people who responded saying they found some of our communication confusing, opaque, and inaccessible. And another 15% referred to the fund as uncommunicative. So there are some lessons for us to learn there about. This is a fantastic forum for meeting people face-to-face, but what more can we do with a new website or social media or different avenues to communicate with you? Why do you call the LPPA help desk? So obviously if you have got some life event or you want to retire or there's some transaction you need to do, you will contact LPPA. But what is it you contact their help desk for primarily? And the principal answers here were the member portal, which has been refreshed and Jill will talk about later, personal information requests, and P60s was third, although a lot of members wanted to know how exactly is my pension calculated. And finally, what things would you like to hear more about? What kind of communication subjects are important to you? And you'll see that education on pensions, climate change, ethical investments in RI, those were the principal themes in terms of what communication you would like more from us. So to meet some of those requests, I'm just briefly going to touch on a very high-level slide about climate change and responsible investments. And colleagues will know that we've had a climate change policy in the fund since 2017, which gets refreshed every 2 or 3 years. And we have a responsible investment policy, which we put in place 2019-2020, which will be refreshed in a year or two's time. But if I could draw your attention to the 3 comments on the right. So although a lot of people said they weren't really aware of what our responsible investment policy or strategy was, there is some really interesting feedback around, isn't the main duty of the fund to ensure the best return for the members? Or can we do lots of different things as we're communicating with you and still maintain the performance? And I gave you some high-level performance figures before. And then some explicit commentary around engagement, disinvestment, divestment, and what we're doing about net zero or decarbonisation. So there are very, very interesting elements of feedback from members for us to consider as we plan more and hopefully more effective communication with you going forward. So in summary, I just really wanted to say that we believe, and I say the accounts are out this evening, so you will be able to see a lot of this content and a lot of the detail, and the financial details certainly from this evening. We do genuinely believe the fund is in really good health. It's added nearly £1 billion. The return for the year is 16.6%. SLAs for member administration services has been very, very high. There is obviously much more to do, and we are constantly trying to improve things, but we are saying the fund is in a really good place financially, and we believe it's well run. We think for those 5 areas that I touched on that we are meeting our strategic goals, and indeed your board had an away day a couple of weeks ago at which we retested strategically, are these the things are we doing the right things? Do we want to continue doing these 5 things? And again, I'm reassured, and hopefully colleagues get reassurance that we think these are the right things that we should be doing. And one of the benefits of today is, I'm sure you will tell me or tell John or colleagues in the margins or over lunch if you think that isn't the case. So today is a good opportunity to test some of that. We are improving the service, and Joe has got, I can't really say exciting news about administration because that doesn't normally scan very well, but there is some exciting news about how we're going to deliver the administration for you. And most importantly, we genuinely hope that since 2019, notwithstanding the conditions around the pandemic and stuff, that we do take on board the feedback you give us. We do welcome the engagement, and we do try and react to those things, and hopefully things like the website, today's commentary, the slide deck, the accounts, that information flow will continue to give you reassurance about how we, because we're only really custodians of your fund, how we continue to do that, and hopefully you feel we do that well for you. So I'll pause there, and thank you for your attention.
Robert, thank you. Robert, thank you ever so much. I'd like now to introduce Richard Tomlinson, the Chief Investment Officer of LPPI, to give us an investment update.
Thank you, John. So I'm Richard Tomlinson, as John said, Chief Investment Officer of LPPI, so the investment arm or investment manager for the scheme. So I was going to talk to you about 5 things here today. I've got about 15 minutes to run through this. So there's 5 key things I was going to touch upon. One is a brief introduction to LPPI, who we are and what we do. A brief update on performance, a few observations on the portfolio at a very high level, a few observations on COVID, and then a little section on responsible investment and climate and some of the key topics that I know John and Robert have already referenced. So very quickly, we're part of LPP, so myself and Joe here are going to talk to the 2 separate sections. We all work for a group company called LPP. I look after the investment side of things, Joe on the administration side. There is a third part of the business, that focuses on asset and liability and risk management, and that essentially nests neatly into the investment activity that I look after. I think one of the key things to cover is, this links back to purpose. What are we here for? We're here to serve you, the members, to serve the employers, to serve the LPFA. And the key thing there is it's the outcomes that matter. We all work very hard, but it's those outcomes that matter. And really, the mission is paying pensions when they fall due and managing contribution levels for the employers. So all of the activity that we engage in terms of managing the portfolio and all the things we think about, they all work towards that end outcome and that end goal. We can talk about the inputs of what we're doing, and we have huge amounts of activity and process, but really the key impact is to how we drive those outcomes and contributions and the payment of pensions in the long term. And within the portfolio, just to give a little bit of context, the 3 things that we'll focus on, again, when we're building a portfolio, it's again to serve those outcomes that we're looking at to deliver the benefits to yourselves and your probably former employers. It's capital growth, so ensuring the fund has capital in the long term to pay the pensions of the future. It's ensuring the portfolio generates income today to pay the pensions today. And then it's managing the liquidity of the portfolio. So that means having sufficient cash on hand to make those, I think it was £5.5 million a week out payments from the scheme, but also the liquidity of the assets we hold, how easily we can buy and sell them, and then moving the capital around the portfolio to enable us to efficiently implement the investments. So fund value, I think John's already stolen my thunder, and I had a sketch on my slides over there on my iPad. I'd put a big circle on here and put, now it's over 7 billion, but I don't now need to say that because John's already mentioned. So as you can see, I'd simply highlight the fund assets have grown since start date 2015, and you can see substantial growth in the assets of the scheme. There are various reasons for that, which I can happily talk about, but being time constrained here, I think the key thing I'd highlight is there has been strong asset performance, and even though, which I'll touch on in a short while, the COVID point, there was a wobble first part of last year, but certainly, as I'm sure you're all aware, asset markets have recovered very strongly after that. Again, it's a much broader conversation as to why, but it's policy support, recovering economy, and critically the vaccine progress, or vaccine success, I should say. So jumping on to investment performance, how has the fund performed? This breaks the fund down. I apologise, this chart is slightly more complicated than we probably should have used. There's too many bars on here, so that is slightly confusing. So I'll pick out the key points. The key chart, the key blocks to focus on is let's get this right, I think it's the left-hand charts, your left. So that side is the fund performance, and then the benchmarks are the ones to the right-hand side. The red bar is the target return that we're shooting for. So in simple terms, from your perspective, if we're beating the red bar, we're meeting the ongoing liabilities to pay pensions. That's the long-term outcome we need to pay pensions. The green bar gives you an indication of what a market portfolio would have done of similar assets. And the one thing I'd highlight is, as you can see, the bars on the left are higher than the green bars in aggregate or in general. The total fund is the blue one. It's actually switched order between the 5-year and the 3-year, which doesn't help as well. But you can see it's outperforming, and it's outperforming the market portfolio. The one that's on the 1 year, you can see it's slightly behind. And I think it's worth noting here that a big chunk of that market outperformance over that horizon which would have been the year to March of this year. Sorry, let me see if my date range is right. This will be to June 30th, sorry. Would have been driven by things that don't really align with the policies of the fund. So for those of you that are more familiar with stock markets and what's been happening underneath the surface in the last year, a big chunk of that performance would have been oil, energy. Many of the stocks that performed very well over that window would be things that don't align particularly well with our long-term perspective on how to run the fund from a funding perspective, and don't align particularly well with some of with our responsible investment policy. So whilst it might optically look like the performance has lagged a little bit in the last year, but what I would point to is, again, it's when you actually peel back the onion skin without using too much of a cliche, chunks of that are driven by, as I say, very strong performance of some energy companies, some banks and other things which don't, when we think about our investment perspective or our investment context, don't align particularly well. So there is some, I think it's a very interesting period to look at because it does open up that conversation. Current asset allocation. What this chart shows you is that around half the portfolio is invested in what we've labelled as public equities. What that means in practice is stocks and shares, and most of those will be very large corporations that you'll be familiar with. So it's the large names that you're familiar with in, say, the FTSE 100 or the S&P 500, whether it's Apple or Microsoft, names of that nature. So there is around half the portfolio is invested in global equities. Then the other half is spread across a range of other assets, cutting across, there's a little bit of cash in there, infrastructure, credit, real estate, fixed income. Fixed income means bonds. So as you can see, and I think one of the key points which I pick off is the real estate and the infrastructure piece, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second via the London Fund. I know John mentioned it earlier. The key points there, as I say, is there's a lot of equity in there, so stocks and shares, and there's a range of other things. But in our opinion, that gives the scheme a very balanced asset allocation, so it's not overly dependent on any one thing. And that the objective of building that asset allocation and that portfolio is to then serve the purpose that I talked about earlier, which was, if you remember, to build capital for the long run, to pay pensions in the future, and provide income today, for paying pensions today, and have the right sort of liquidity profile to be able to manage across that. So very quickly, London Fund. John mentioned on this. John touched on this earlier. Idea is it's a collaboration with the London Civ, and other London boroughs are starting to take interest, and certainly one has allocated, and we're in conversations with others. Focus on London. Target return is economic, i.e. this is not simply an impact, loss-leading investment. This is absolutely commercial and from a fiduciary point of view. So we're looking to certainly exceed the discount rate or the target return of the fund. The focus is on positive social outcomes. So we're thinking job creation, area regeneration, positive social outcomes, and with the bulk of the capital in Greater London. I say I'm conscious of time. I've only got 6 minutes left, so I won't elaborate too much further on that. A little bit more detail on this slide in terms of what the fund will invest in. Probably no surprises here, the sorts of things we're looking at. Real estate in London, it's a private rented sector. I think 2 years ago I talked to you about Millet Place and some of the investment that the scheme has in East London and the Docklands, affordable housing, regeneration, co-living, senior living. These are all themes that you're seeing that link into the broader societal context of things that are important to Londoners. Infrastructure in London. This is more now looking at a nod to the future, that transition piece, the climate change. This is what is the future of London's infrastructure going to be. This isn't investing in roads or bridges. This is more thinking what does the future of London need and how can we support that through our investment activity. The growth capital piece is much smaller, to be frank. That's in the mandate. At the moment we haven't made, we're not actively looking at any investments in that bucket, but it's within the mandate, so we could in the future. So, very high-level summary of the first investment in the London Fund. Sorry, I apologise, there are a few too many words on this slide. This is something called DOOR, or we'll refer to it as DOOR. It's essentially a large PRS-type portfolio that we are invested in now, and it's a joint venture with a number of other very large institutional investors. As you can see, we've listed it's several sites. Probably the most famous is the former Olympic Village in I'll say East London just to not get my boroughs muddled up. But it takes in a whole series of large activities or large sites. One thing that I think is really key to highlight of this complex and this investment is, well, A, it's scaled, so it has a significant impact on London. B, it's been selected due to the alignment with what the scheme is trying to achieve, that long-term horizon, that alignment with investing in London for Londoners, that the mindset of the sort of long-termism and our responsible investment policies. And certainly from my personal perspective, whenever I look at the way the partners in this are trying to do things, I very much conclude they're doing things in the right way. So, it's that sort of looking to the future. So creating housing that works for families, that works for people. I own a home now, but I didn't for many, many, many years and rented in London. And the challenges of that in private sector rental agreements were numerous, including, one minute you have a house, then you don't because the landlord wants to sell it, the inability to change, maintenance issues. I think I had a house in Islington or a flat in Islington that the boiler didn't work for about 6 or 8 months and trying to get the landlord to fix it. Many of those challenges that tenants face, essentially the operator of this addressed through very thoughtful, owned, aligned services. So, for example, they own the maintenance businesses. There's dedicated services on site that tenants can have long-term contracts. They're able to redecorate. I think from memory, the contract's perpetual. So there is no way the landlord can ask you to leave, etc. So many of the things that I think have been challenging about private sector rental in London, this investment and the implementation seeks to address. So I've got 2 or 3 minutes left. COVID, what does it mean? How has it impacted us? It's hit all of our lives. We've all had to change many of the things that we do. Key points, how has it impacted the investment outlook? It certainly created some wobbles start of last year. If you can remember, that there was February, March. I think if you looked at markets, you'd have been quite concerned. Certainly March into April. And then the response came, which was, I think the terms you might use as a bazooka from central banks and governments and things. And I think it was clear at that point that the issue was so large, the response was going to be even larger, and that then had an impact on asset markets. So if you look over the longer term, COVID's a tiny blip. Markets have recovered very strongly, as you've seen from the fund value. What does that mean for the future, though? What are we doing in terms of, are we changing our investment approach? The simple and truthful answer is we haven't really changed that much in the long term. Helpfully, and this is where my job is a lot easier than some others in different businesses, we have a long-term outlook. We tend to skew towards high-quality assets that are investing for the long term based on those outcomes we're seeking to deliver earlier. So many of the assets we hold were sailed through, frankly, and they may have dipped off with the short-term value, but then have recovered strongly since. And how are we changing how we manage LPPI? We, like everybody, worked at home for a considerable period. We have changed how we work. We've moved to a hybrid working model, which frankly has worked very, very well. We've continued to run the business, and I'd say save for a couple of weeks of getting laptops for everyone and sorting out IT, we essentially operated uninterrupted. Although the whole of the team now know my 2 children quite well, as they're 5 and 8, and they kept popping up and throwing things at me when I was on conference calls. Responsible investment and climate change. So I've got 1 minute. Well, actually, I'm out of time. My watch is fast, or slow, I should say. So I'll make 1 or 2 comments here, then I'll free up the stage. Huge part of what we do, both from an LPFA, aligning with the LPFA's policy, and in terms of who and what we are. We are very aligned with our stakeholders. We take this very seriously. And if I'm honest, I was saying to John, the chairman, earlier that, I have to be honest, I've gone slightly native on this type of stuff. I've gone to the point now where I fully agree and see this. This has become the investment context. This isn't about us just ticking boxes anymore. And the reason I'd say that is that the importance of climate and some of these other things, they've gone from being something that you feel is important to it's now influencing policy, it's influencing tax, which then influences asset values, and it influences how you're going to invest for the future. Because if you buy an asset today and you're not thinking about this, you may have a problem if you need to sell it in 5 years' time if it's not aligned with that future policy path. So, as I say, these type of activities are fundamental and core now, not just to our policies, but to our investment underwriting and how we manage the portfolios. And on that note, I will thank you very much for your time.
Richard, thank you for taking us through the investment performance, which I know is so important to all our members. I'd like now to introduce Joe Derbyshire, the Managing Director of our administrators, LPPA. Joe.
Good morning, everyone. I wish I'd worn quieter shoes. Thank you very much, John. I'm here today to talk to you about pensions administration and what we do at LPPA, which is hugely exciting and hugely fun, and I could talk about all day. So just in terms of a whiz through, I'm going to talk to you about who we are, what we do, what our objectives are, how our performance has been over the last 12 months, what we're doing about member experience, member communications and engagement, and what's coming next, which is hugely exciting. So an overview of what we do. So we are the administration business. We provide pensions administration services to 17 clients, 2 of whom are our joint shareholders of the LPP Group, LPFA and Lancashire. They're predominantly local government funds, but we do also provide administration to some fire authorities and 1 police client. So we manage all aspects of pensions administration, that whole end-to-end, from when you join the scheme through all the life events that happen right through to retirement and beyond. There are some big numbers on this slide. We do provide administration to over 600,000 members across over 2,000 employers. We pay over £100 million a month in pension benefits across our client base. And that's about 85 million in a regular kind of monthly pension payment, and the rest is the lump sum types of benefits. Our help desk takes an enormous amount of calls, inquiries through our website, and obviously incoming post. We still have post to deal with. And we have around 200 members of staff, about 200 in Preston and about 60 that are home workers. That's an idea of what we do. Our strategic objectives are to provide high quality, cost-effective pensions administration. So what does that mean? So how do we measure quality? I'm going to run through a couple of the metrics that we use to measure quality. How do we know we're cost effective? Well, we benchmark our services every year with an external benchmarking specialist in this market to make sure that we're providing value for money. Self-sustaining performance is really about the financial stability of the business, which I'm happy to report is very healthy. There's been a lot of work done over the last couple of years to really understand and manage the cost base of the administration business and keep providing that value for money. We do want to have an exciting, forward-thinking and collaborative place to work for our employees. We are doing much more regular engagement with our people. And again, I'm happy to report that our engagement scores are above the benchmark for this sector. And we're becoming more outward-facing as well, taking on board local and international excellence in how we can improve our service, looking at other pension funds in the UK and further afield. So performance update. This is our what we call our casework performance. So every piece of work that comes into us, so a new joiner, a transfer, a retirement, is a case. What we do about 15,000 pieces of casework every month in LPPA. Over 2,000 of those are just for LPFA members. And each piece of work has a metric that we measure. So it may be that for an ill health retirement, we've got 5 days to process that. It may be for a transfer, we've got 20 days. And the clock starts ticking in terms of measuring those things when we have all the information that we need to process that case. So what that graph shows you there is the dotted blue line is the 95%. So we aim to get 95% of all those cases done within the timeframes that we have for each specific case. The green line that you can see along the top is where we have finished for each month. And you can see that we've exceeded that overall 95% target every single month for the past year. And I can't tell you how proud I am of my team for that, given everything else that's been thrown at the business for the last 18 months. And you can see there's a little bit of a dip. That dip you'll see in a couple of the other graphs. That's that COVID wave that we had at the start of 2021. And just to kind of give you an idea of the scale of that, the first week in February, the reported deaths to LPPA were 200% up year on year. And even for a business of our scale, trying to cope with that kind of unplanned activities is still very difficult. So this is the performance on our help desk. It's often a kind of the place that you'll come into contact with us most. The performance has generally been good through the year. Again, you can see that spike. That spike again is due really to that COVID wave of high deaths at the start of the year. We prioritise bereavement calls quite rightly, so that we don't have people who are grieving hanging on the phone. What that does is it pushes up the wait in our general queue and pushes up overall wait times. But again, since the beginning of May, Help Desk has been back within the service levels that we aim for, which is to answer the phone within 4 minutes and to reply to an inquiry via our Contact Us form within 2 days. We also measure how happy you are. So these are the customer satisfaction scores for LPFA only. They're not our entire client base. Hence, the help desk figures are not on here because not every inquiry into our help desk needs us to ascertain what fund one of our members is from. But they're consistently high on the help desk. They're usually over 85% every month. These are the figures for just kind of 3 processes here: retirements, estimates, and bereavements. There's a little bit of volatility on the bereavements, mainly because we don't get high volume. It's a very sensitive thing, as you can imagine, trying to survey grieving relatives in terms of the service that we provided when we processed that case. But our service scores remain consistently high, which again is credit to the teams that do the work. What we've started to do in the last few months is to start to look at, because the SLA performance on paper looks great, it's high 90s, it looks like everything's okay, but that's a very quantitative measure. So what we've started to do is look at qualitative measures. What's the experience for people? How long does it take end to end to process a case? And this slide just gives you a little bit of what we're trying to unpackage. So this is looking at our retirements from active service, so where somebody's still employed. And what you can see is the top graph is where we are notified in a timely manner by the employer that somebody is planning to retire. So we're given lots of notice, lots of time to process the case. The dotted line through the middle is 50% of people paid within 30 days. That's what that's our starting point in terms of what we're trying to do. So the orange line at the top is the people that we pay where they've got no AVC and their employer notifies us in a timely manner. There's a line further down the bottom that's actually quite hard to see, and that's where somebody has an AVC. And this is an area that we're starting to look at a lot more. So it's harder when we're dealing with an AVC provider to get that AVC disinvested quickly and get the pension processed quickly. So that's going to be an area of focus for us. The graph at the bottom, which is it's saying the same thing. The only difference is that the graph at the bottom are where we're notified late by the employer. So you can see how critical it is for us to be notified in a timely manner for us to process retirements on time. Again, that's going to be a real focus for our engagement team who work with our employers so that we can influence employers to notify us faster and we can get those pensions paid in a more timely manner. This slide is just a slightly different flavour. These are retirements from deferred. So this is where somebody's left employment and retires. So from our point of view, the employer's out of play here in terms of how long it takes us to process a retirement. So what you can see here again is we're still not at that 50% within 30 days yet. What influences that? It's generally whether we have accurate data. So we typically try to notify deferred members 3 months before their retirement date that their retirement is coming. And if we don't have good contact details, then we can't contact them very quickly. And then obviously it depends how quickly the member returns retirement options and those kinds of things to see how quickly we can process it. But that's the kind of thing we're starting to look at, that quality of service now. In terms of member communication and engagement, we've strengthened the engagement team. More of you have signed up to the online portal, which I know is clunky. We are replacing it with a new one. We've got a new newsletter that you may, I hope some of you have seen and read and enjoyed. We are starting to focus on getting rid of that jargon and that very pensionsy language in some of our communications, but we have hundreds of letters. So we're at the start, but you will see that start to change over time. We do have a new website that was launched last year as well. If you haven't been on it, please have a look. It's lppapensions.co.uk. Lots and lots of information on there, particularly the kinds of things that many of the questions that have come in have asked about. How do I get an estimate? Can I retire early? Lots of those kinds of things. Lots of nice little animations and little videos as well for you to watch if you prefer that kind of medium rather than reading lots of words. So lots of focus on improving that kind of retirement experience by improving how quickly we pay things. We've also taken a bit of time to try and understand what retirement means to you, the members. So I've got a short little video here that will get played. You may spot yourself or you may spot a quote because LPFA members were very proactive in contributing to this survey. So thank you for that. And I'll have the video, please. Thank you if you did take the time to respond to our request for information about your retirement. It was great. I love that video. It's why this is the why we do what we do. Okay, so what's next? I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to really fly through this. We have a huge transformation program on at the minute called Project PACE. where we are replacing a multitude of existing administration systems with one new system, which will help us to deliver better service, and it's far better value for money than the myriad of things we have at the moment. Big job. We'll go live with that through 2022. We've also got that service improvement programme I was talking about to focus on how we pay more people more quickly. And the regulatory environment in pensions is never quiet, but it is exceptionally busy at the minute. Some of you may have heard of McLeod, which is the age discrimination ruling in terms of local government reforms and other public pension reforms. There's also Goodwin, which is about equal treatment for male spouses. There's a rumoured return of exit cap around people who leave and the total value of their benefits when they leave. And the pensions regulator is also looking at a single code of practice to replace the existing multitude of ones they have at the moment. So lots on to keep us busy. But hopefully there'll be lots more to report on when I'm here again next year. Thank you.
Joe, thank you for that really interesting update on all the stuff that's been going on the administration side despite the pressures of COVID. I'd like now to hand back to Robert, who's going to take us through the developments we've made on responsible investment and climate change.
Hello again, colleagues. I've got about 12 minutes. I've got about 45 minutes of content and about 12 minutes to share it with you because, as we've spoken about quite a lot today, you did want to hear some more about responsible investment and climate change, what we've been doing since 2019. So don't forget, the slide deck will be available and a lot of the detail will be on the website, and we do recommend you go to the website for some real detailed, transparent reporting and content on what's happened since we last met in 2019. So, 4 main themes I'm going to touch upon: investing responsibly, tackling climate change, investing in green, and heading to net zero. Before I start, it's worth just drawing your attention to the box on your left, which is headed, "We are stewards of the future." And the reason for pointing this out is that, as you would expect, the board on a regular basis does challenge itself and does test itself against the objectives and the strategy for the fund, but also how we are impacting upon our members and our employers. And if you just take a moment to read, "We are stewards of the future. How our members' funds are invested impacts the future of our economy, our environment, our society, and therefore you, our members' futures." And we spend quite a bit of time discussing, debating whether or not that is still what we want to achieve, what we want to contribute, alongside the fiduciary responsibility of making sure that we continue to invest and pay pensions for the considerable future ahead of us. So that's the context against a process, and the process very simply is down the left-hand side as you look at it. We have input from stakeholders, so you'll see some of the organisations we deal with on a regular basis in this space. The board then makes some strategic decisions and sets policies, and then myself and the team on behalf of LPFA, or Richard and his colleagues on behalf of LPPI, who have their own policies but also implement our policies, operate these strategies, policies, and transparently report against the progress we make. So that should give you a snapshot of the process, which is aligned to our vision. At every step of the way, we genuinely think that ESG, so environmental, social, and governance issues, are embedded in our processing. So looking at what investments to hold, how they're doing, what impact it has. There are lots of policies, procedures, and controls around how we do that. And again, there is plenty of information on not just the LPFA's website, but if you look at LPP's website, you will see some real detail on the detail we go into, the testing we do, and the validation we do around some of these investments. So, what are we actually doing, and what have we done more of since you last met with us in 2019? We're doing much more engagement in the usual ways you'd expect us to. So we vote at AGMs, we send letters to company management, we email investor relation teams, but of course all this is embedded in the policies for engagement with which we operate. We do vote globally. we live in an interconnected world, and so LPPI, on your behalf, regularly vote on behalf of non-UK-based companies as well as UK-based companies. We do some collaboration with other organisations, but I'm very pleased to say we will do more, but we are one of the funds which does an awful lot of reporting and transparently put stuff out there as to what we're doing. So we do want to be seen as not just responsible investors, but transparently trying to improve in these areas. I talked before, and it's come up on all of the speakers so far, about collaboration. It's really important to us that we collaborate and we learn from others. There are some names on here which you may well be familiar with. I don't know if any colleagues from Share Action are here or Make My Money Matter, but we are building some relationships with organisations who live and breathe this and are really seized of these issues. And since we met in 2019, we've either joined new organisations like the Stewardship Council, or we continue to contribute to things like the C40 cities. C40 cities is about 95 major cities which are all trying to progress down decarbonisation using pension funds largely to achieve some of those aims. So again, the themes from this morning are continuing in terms of we engage with and we learn from and share stuff with lots of different organisations. Don't get hung up on this slide. The bullet points on the left, as you look at it, are those issues that we do engage about. So climate action, emissions, but also corporate governance, bribery and corruption, executive remuneration. Those are the things that we will get involved with via LPPI. And down the right-hand side, you'll see the activity in the first 3 months of this business year. So April through to July. LPPI attended 62 company meetings, voted on 603 company and shareholder proposals, attended 35 conference calls, 29 emails, 19 companies, wrote 6 open letters to management teams, and LPFA ourselves, we wrote not just to the current government in the UK, but also the European Union about transitioning more quickly and decarbonising more quickly for the green recovery that we need to achieve. So there is lots of evidence about activity and things that LPPI and ourselves are doing. What about some examples? So let me give you one quick example from LPPI around Alphabet. Alphabet, some of you may know, is actually the parent company of Google, who you will all be familiar with. So 16% of shareholders voted at their AGM for a resolution around more human rights risk oversight in their organisation. So 16% is probably the pension population or the investment population of share owners. And you might not think that's a very big proportion, but actually that voice and the ability to share that voice in large companies can make a difference, because what the result of that AGM, so following that AGM, Alphabet have completely refreshed their audit committee. They've introduced new charters, and they are now introducing reviews for risk exposure around sustainability and particularly civil and human rights. So change can be affected by engagement, and we like to think that as a fund, and principally via LPPI, we are contributing to that request to make change. So I know I'm having to rush this, so apologies for the speed, but we also are hugely interested in climate change, and we're interested in climate change primarily because it's a risk to the fund. It's a risk to us about our ability to pay your pensions. So what are we doing? I mentioned before we have a policy. The policy is on the website. The policy was implemented in 2017. We're probably a bit different to other funds you may have come across or other local authorities or councils. We did our climate change policy first. We saw how that was operating. We measured that. We reported against that. And then we did a wider responsible investment policy in 2020. So we've been learning some lessons, getting some benefits of evidence and sharing some of that evidence. But the policy is still fit for purpose, and we still implement and expect LPPI to implement our climate change policy for us. What about some numbers? Well, those of you who understand the green assets we hold, so positive things we hold, like wind, solar, hydro, clean tech funds, or district heating. And obviously, brown includes a raft of things, but for today's purpose is essentially fossil fuel holdings, so things in oil and gas, or organisations which transport or deal with. So brown and green, it's a little bit simplistic, but just for the benefit of today, it might be helpful to colleagues. If you look from December 18 through to today, the top two lines, we've had about 18 companies that we held stocks and shares in, as Richard said earlier, who were brown. And the last couple of years, we've got that down to 2 companies. And the value has gone from 20 million to about 3.7 million. So don't forget, we are essentially a £7 billion pension fund. We're the 63rd biggest fund in the UK, and we hold 3.7 million in what you would recognise as oil and gas companies. And on the bottom of the slide, in terms of green assets, we started in 2018 with about 117 million, and today we're up to about 161 million. So I just want to give you some evidence, some experience, and some numbers around some of the things we're trying to do. So that's all well and good on some things like climate change as part of the wider responsible investment piece. What about holding companies to account? Because I mentioned 60% of shareholders wasn't very much, but achieved some change. A couple of examples here. You'll recognise Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble do soap and detergents and things like that. LPPI actually supported a shareholder resolution requesting that the company actually gets its act together on deforestation, because colleagues might be familiar with things like palm oil and other areas where deforestation really has an impact on what they do and the products they deliver. Supporting that resolution at their AGM, that resolution actually got passed by 68% of the voting shareholders. And what's happened since, so we've decided to do something, we've taken some action. What happened since? Procter & Gamble are now specifically looking at individual suppliers and how their impact on deforestation applies and what more they can do to mitigate some of that stuff. And similarly, colleagues will know or come across JP Morgan, that massive banking enterprise JP Morgan. Again, LPPI supported a resolution around how would they look to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions as it impacted from their lending activities. And although 48% of shareholders voted in favour, that wasn't enough to get a majority to change it at their AGM. But what's happened since is in October of last year, the bank announced a significant commitment to aligning its financing with the goals of the Paris Agreement, and have actually launched the Centre for Carbon Transition, which they monitor and they're starting to make some difference with. So some of this activity, so we're only a £7 billion fund, LPPI is only 21, 22 billion pound asset manager, but your voice, our voice, does help make a difference in some of these areas. So we just wanted to share that, and there's more information on the website for you. Very, very quickly, 2 slides. The overall total investment we have in the fund, the LPFA 7 billion, is about 2.7% of it is green and about 1.9% is brown, just to give some context. Not that I'm comparing this with other funds in local government, but the average brown in LGPS is high 2s, maybe 3% of holdings, just to give you some context. 2 very, very quick case studies, just to keep it real and keep it live for you. Flexion is an investment through GLIL, which LPPI support, where Flexion develop, build, own and manage energy storage systems, because we have a lot of investments in wind. So one of the things that they do, and we've invested in and we've got some governance over, is large-scale batteries. So there's real investment in things which are going to help for the future. So that's stuff on the way in. On the way out, what about demand? A second one would be, there's an organisation, a company called Smart Meter Assets, where again, we have an investment in them, where we're helping them increase the smart meter tools or smart meters to actually allow people to monitor how much they're using and hopefully reduce their cost and their usage. So 2 examples, one the way in, one the way out, about investments that we make on your behalf. And very quickly, the final piece, and I think John mentioned this in his introductory words, we are very pleased, but I wouldn't wish you to be under any misunderstanding. We have been thinking about this since 2017 and beyond, about how we can make a real commitment to achieving net zero as part of the wider investment and pensions landscape. And we have made a commitment to move towards net zero by 2050 and substantial progress by 2030. That might be 50%, and the reason for the hesitation in saying to you it will be 50% by 2030 is because there aren't quite enough metrics or standard metrics and methodologies to measure how we might do this. But we have made the commitment to try and achieve that. Equally importantly, LPPI, as an asset manager, have also made that commitment via IIGCC as well. So they're committed to doing this as the asset manager, and we're committed on your behalf of doing this as the asset owner. IIGCC, really good website, really easy to understand website. It's not too full of jargon, but they actually have got about 350 individual members or funds or investors, and they manage, it's about 39 trillion of assets. So it's a big community trying to drive some change. We have 12 months from making the commitment last week to actually deliver a detailed, transparent plan as to what we're going to do. Now you might think, oh, well, why can't you just get on with it? Well, we can't get on with it in the detail to which you might be challenging me, because our portfolio of investments is made up of like 8 asset classes, and you saw before from Richard, there are 8 kind of areas that we invest in. Equity, stocks and shares, you know, is rather easier to monitor, test, get information on, get reporting on, and we are doing some really good work on capturing information about carbon from our book of equities. That's not the issue. The issue is some of these other asset classes, which are much more difficult, much more onerous, or don't have consistent reporting that I would believe in, or Richard would believe in, and therefore we should put out to you. And we're not alone. Lots of organisations have got some of these challenges as well. There are 3 areas, so property, so real estate, infrastructure, which we talked about before, and credit, where it's really, really pleasing to come back to my theme about collaboration and sustainability. It's really pleasing to note that IIGCC, by having all those other organisations, has now got some tools, some metrics, some frameworks, some ways of helping us with real estate, infrastructure and credit. So I'm personally really optimistic that about 70 or 80% of our book, we can get some detailed work done on what we can achieve by 2030 and 2050 for about 70 or 80% of the book because of working in collaboration with others. But it will be a journey to try and get to exactly what we're going to do and then tell you what we're going to do by 2030 as well as net zero by 2050. So, I'm very conscious of time. I hope that has given you a flavour of a number of different areas: engagement, listening, collaboration, sustainability, some real transparency about it. We can always do more, of course we can. But you will see on our website or our social media or our board papers, you will see the deliberations, the challenge we give LPPI, we give ourselves, we report against. We think your money, your contributions and employer contributions are making a difference. We do think we have made real progress in 2017, and hopefully today has helped illuminate that a little bit more about some of the progress. We are investing in green, but we're investing in the transition. We're investing in helping others and learning from others to accelerate that. And it's going to take an awful lot of work. It's going to take an awful lot of challenge, an awful lot of support from LPPI colleagues, but we will be producing a very detailed plan in the next 12 months to say exactly how we're going to get there by 2030 and 2050. So I'm grateful that you raised this and you wanted to get some more, and I hope that has gone some way towards giving you more information about what the fund is doing on your behalf. Thank you very much, guys.
thank you ever so much for coming back so promptly after the break. We're actually going to have a slight change in the order. We were going to do the Q&A session now first and then introduce our guest speaker, but actually we're now going to do it the other way round. So let me introduce our guest speaker this morning. Deborah Elsina, MBE, is the Chief Executive of Independent Age. She joined Independent Age as Chief Executive in October of 2019 and brought extensive experience of voluntary sector strategic leadership. Over the 30 years that Deborah's worked in the voluntary sector, she's gained experience with a broad range of organisations, from academic think tanks to charities working on international refugee and human rights issues. Prior to joining Independent Age, Deborah worked for Bowel Cancer UK for 11 years, including 10 as Chief Executive. And in 2017, she played a leading role in merging Bowel Cancer UK and Beating Bowel Cancer, becoming Chief Executive of the new merged charity on the 1st of January 2018. She was awarded an MBE in the Queen's 90th Birthdays Honours List in 2016 in recognition of her service to bowel cancer patients. She was named Charity Chief Executive of the Year at the Third Sector Excellence Awards in 2017, Charity Principal of the Year in the Charity Times Awards 2018, and one of the 25 most influential speakers in the voluntary sector by the Charity Times in 2019. Incredibly well qualified to talk to us about life as one gets to the upper end of the numbers. So, Deborah, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John. And how lovely to be here today with you all, although seeing the back of the hall is incredibly difficult. But actually, this is my first in-person event in the last 20 months. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. So thank you so much to LPFA for inviting me. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm just going to give you a bit of an introduction to Independent Age, who we are, what we do, the services that we have available for you and for those that you know, and then how you could get involved if you'd like to. So, who are we? What do we do? So we were actually founded 158 years ago, and for many of those years worked as the Royal United Kingdom Beneficent Society, and that's actually still our official name. Today, in fact, we have around 160 staff working across the United Kingdom and are fantastically supported by around 2,000 volunteers helping us to deliver our direct services and about 15,000 very active campaigners. And our vision and mission, which we've co-created with people in later life, are clear. And they are. Our vision of the future that we would like us all to have is that for everyone to live a happy, connected and purposeful later life. And our mission, so our specific focus, is to ensure that as we grow older, we all have the opportunity to live well with dignity, choice and purpose. And I think it's worth just pausing and just reflecting that this is very much written in a way to reflect this is about us all. You know, it's one of those irrefutable facts. We're all aging. From that minute we're born, we all start an aging process. And so we're really interested in the future that we hope everybody will be able to enjoy in later life. Now, as we know, and I think very beautifully illustrated by Joe's video, it can be great. Growing older can be such a journey, can't it? I certainly find it one. And later life in particular can be full of the things that Joe's video was mentioning about more time with family and friends to grow your skills and passions, to learn new things and to go on new adventures. And I'm definitely planning a few. But of course, what we also know is that that's not the case for everyone. And right now, in the UK, there are around 13.5 million people, about 18% of our population, who are over the age of 65. And of those people, 2.1 million are currently living in poverty or financially insecure around the margins of that. A further 1.5 million people have an unmet care need. And whilst there have been some nice words about social care reform, actually there's no clear plan for expanding eligibility or ensuring that everyone is able to receive the care that they need when, where and how they need it. And actually just this week we released a new research report called Patiently Waiting, which was about the people over the age of 65 caught up in the current 5.6 million backlog that the NHS is experiencing for treatments, including for routine surgery for things like hip and knee replacements. And what our research very clearly found is that the majority of people are now every day experiencing pain and a deterioration in both their physical and mental health. And we estimate that around a third of the people caught up in that backlog, it's probably slightly higher than that in fact, are over the age of 65. In addition to that, there are also 1.2 million people who are chronically lonely, with about 500,000 people telling us that they don't speak to anyone for 5 or 6 days a week. Now, I guess what we can all know, having lived for a while, is that these things can happen at any point in our lives, that we can all experience those things. It isn't unique to people who are over the age of 65. But I suppose the specific challenge that we're focused on is that sometimes for people in later life, actually sometimes when those challenges combine, it can be much more difficult for people to find the solutions that they need and seek. So, for example, just this week there's been a lot of conversation about people going private for NHS because NHS can't cope with the backlog, they can't clear the backlog fast enough, so this is for routine operations. Well, if you're in 2.1 million that are actually living in poverty and experiencing over the 50% that are experiencing daily pain, then actually that's just not going to be an option for you. And actually what you will see is that potentially your sense of purpose, your ability to carry out your daily activities, your social interaction will get poorer. And you have this awful kind of linking of all of those different factors together, which become difficult to solve. And certainly in our recent research, what we discovered was that at least 50% of people told us that right now their mental health is also deteriorating. So whilst we are broadly here for everyone, absolutely, actually we have a very specific focus, and that's on challenging ageism, which quite frankly appears to be the last bastion of acceptable discrimination, which of course it is not, within the UK right now, and on tackling inequalities that exist in older age. So we're particularly focused on working alongside people who are experiencing inequalities, where those combinations of factors mean that actually working alongside a charity like ours could be of benefit to them. And we always try and focus what we do on areas where we can have the greatest impact and reach. And we prioritise 3 key thematic areas, quite broad, around health and care, poverty and financial security, which is one of the many reasons I'm here today, and also on loneliness and social connection. So what do we actually do? Well, we do 3 core things. So we deliver information, advice and connection services for people over the age of 65. We deliver funding and capacity building for the sector, and we do that because actually we believe that people should be able to access the service support, activities, information that they want when, where and how they want them, wherever they live in the UK. And right now it's a bit of a postcode lottery, not just in terms of private and public provision, but also in terms of voluntary sector. So practically one thing we've just done as a part of our response to the pandemic is given away about £3.2 million to smaller charities working alongside people in later life who were at greatest risk to COVID. We also campaign for positive change based on our priority areas, and that's because actually sometimes we can do hundreds, thousands of benefits checks for people just to make sure that they're accessing their entitlements. But actually, we want it to be simpler than that. We want people to have an easy access to their entitlements. So we want to see systemic change on a number of different levels, and that's why we campaign. So just looking a bit more at our services so you can know what to expect if you want to access any of them or want to find information. So the first one is around our advice guides and our fact sheets. So we produce a really great array of information guides and fact sheets. They are quality assured, and on a range of issues from health, housing, personal life and future planning. Some great information there on things like avoiding scams, which is such a pain, aren't they, for us all. So information that we have developed in partnership with people in later life and of course with professional experts as well to make sure it's high quality and accurate. And I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that we have what's called a PIF tick. So that's that bit in that corner there, and that's about we are accredited by the Patient Information Forum. And I wanted to draw your attention to that because that basically says we have a robust process for developing information. We know that it's needed, and actually we know that it's resonating with the audience it's intended for, and it's accurate. So when you're looking at information that you find on the web, just check. Just check that, because there's an awful lot of inaccurate information as well, and that's probably not going to help you. So look for those certified providers. Of course, information isn't a panacea. Sometimes it's really useful, isn't it? I certainly find it so, thinking about just giving me background to a topic that I'm looking at, or just those hints and tips and starters for 10 about what I should be asking. And so, and we certainly get a lot of very positive feedback to our information. And what I haven't said but should say, if you are interested in those fact sheets, you can download them all for free from our website or give us a call and order them online, and the number for that's just coming up. But if you do also have any information or any questions, having read anything, then you can always call us. So our team of helpline staff and advisors can support you, particularly in the areas of care and support, housing options, money and benefits, health and mobility, and whether that's relevant for you or for someone you know, please do just give us a call. It's a free phone number there at the bottom of the screen. And again, you can find it on our website. Again, the link down there, so independentage.org. Another thing that we do is that we connect or reconnect people. And this is a really important area of our work, along with the other things. So we're trying to connect or reconnect people to their communities, to their passions and interests, to new friends, to new skills. And we do this in person through our community services, or by phone, or through, we also have some kind of digital groups as well. And it's worth saying lots of people are referred to us, for example, via their GPs, or some people refer themselves directly, and both is absolutely fine. And lots of people who come to us are probably perhaps post-bereavement, or maybe struggling with some mental or physical health needs. And what we try and do is to listen and to really understand the situation someone finds himself in, and to work alongside them to build on their strengths and their assets and their interests, and think, what would good look like? What would that improvement look like? And to build a plan to help people go from perhaps the darker place that they feel they're in at that moment to somewhere where actually the dream is that they don't need us anymore. I mean, they can always come back, but actually we want to reconnect people into the lives that they choose. And sometimes we all need a little bit of support to do that, and that's why we're here. We still provide some traditional befriending services, so linking one person in later life with a volunteer, either by phone or in person. And whilst we're kind of moving away from that, partly because we don't want to create dependent relationships, so we're kind of offering more kind of befriending plus, because we want to link people to a wider array of interests, if that's what they want, and it is about personal choice. But I have to say that for many people, that befriending relationship, that safe place, and we match very carefully, is a really helpful starting point as people refine their feet and build their confidence and self-esteem. And you can find more details about all of that on our website. So, how could you get involved? Well, if you've got some time you'd like to, we would love that. Of course we would. We're a charity. So one of the things we're always looking for, and it sounds like LPFA are too, is just that insight into what's going on. So, for example, we've had a fantastic group of what we call COVID correspondents working alongside us throughout this last 20 months or so, where they have been answering regular surveys from us. Someone did mention singing and dancing the other day, and there's the cue, thank you. But mercifully, it's still working, the PowerPoint, so I won't try that one. But our COVID correspondents have been answering surveys just to really give us that insight into what's happening to people during the pandemic and where do they want us to focus. So, and also just sharing stories and life experience is just really valuable for all areas of our work, actually. So, you can always sign up to hear more from us and to kind of engage in that way. Another thing you could do is to volunteer with our connection services or become a lay reader for our patient information. All of that would be incredibly helpful and valuable to us. And actually, it's just worth stressing that that volunteering relationship on some of our connection services is not one way. So this is a lovely picture of Dennis and Krista and Krista's dog Bailey as well. And I think what's lovely about this story, so when we first met Dennis, he really had very little social contact with anyone. And he wanted somebody to come and visit him. And so Krista and a dog started to do that. And then, of course, he really struggled, as so many of us have, through the pandemic when Krista couldn't visit. And instead, of course, they've been keeping in touch by phone calls, etc. But there's just this lovely quote I thought I'd share, because what we've been enjoying at Independent Age is just those connections starting to come back together. Because let's face it, there's just nothing to replace this, is there? However good the phone calls are, or the Teams call, or the Zoom, actually just seeing somebody is just very special. And Dennis says, Krista coming back to me is like a ray of sunshine. When you live on your own, you can be subject to becoming very moody at times. But when Krista comes, it lights up. And so he very clearly gets so much from his friendship and relationship with Krista. But Krista also gets an awful lot from that too. And all our volunteers tell us this isn't about a one-sided relationship. This is actually beneficial to both parties. So I really recommend it, actually. It's a beautiful and fulfilling way of supporting our work. Of course, another way you could fundraise for us. I'm a charity worker, I'm bound to say that, right? It's the charity worker's curse, 30 years in this as a charity professional, and it's always the great joy. Next life, I'm going to sell Dysons or something. But we're always looking, and I have great admiration and respect for all the people that are running the London Marathon for us on Sunday, and for the people that do half marathons or walks or just tea parties. So, if that floats your boat, we would love that. But, at the same time, we won't turn down a donation from you or anyone you know who you think might want to support our work, because it's a really important aspect of our income. And the more we can build our voluntary income, the more that we will be able to do to increase our impact and reach for people in later life. And finally, I wanted to talk to you about campaigning and campaigning with us. And it sounds like lots of you have, lots of kind of great interest in things such as, responsible and ethical investment, which is a passion of mine too. But there are lots of things that we campaign on, including, of course, I've just been talking around our access to treatment work. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about our work around poverty, because that's so central at the moment as everything is getting more expensive. So we have a priority around addressing financial insecurity in later life. Now, one of our challenges in the UK, as you will all, I'm sure, be aware, is that we have one of the least generous state pensions in the developed world. So, and actually there's very little interest in changing that anytime soon. So we've been looking for what those solutions might be in the short term. And one of them we think that's really important is around access for people to pension credit, which is a means-tested benefit. And it basically tops up people's weekly income to £177 for an individual or to £270 for a couple. And what's important about pension credit is that it's actually a gateway benefit. So even if you receive just a very little bit of pension credit because your savings are too high to get too much, it will be a passport to other things. So free TV licenses, very topical at the moment, free dental care, housing support, and a range of other benefits as well that can really kind of add up and be helpful to people who are currently below the poverty line. So one of the challenges of pension credit is that it has the lowest take-up of any means-tested benefit in the UK, and it's been at around 60 to 64% over the last 10 years. We don't think that's right. There are lots of reasons for it, some of which is, of course, some people don't want to claim benefits. That's fine, that's individual choice. But mostly it's about people don't know it exists, and actually the government isn't in any way proactive in terms of finding the people who need it and making sure that they can access it. And so that's why we've been campaigning. And actually it's finally, there's a lot of interest. The current pensions minister is very interested in this and finally promoting it, which is positive. But we do a lot of work behind the scenes, as all charities like ours do, so talking to ministers and officials and anyone we can talk to try and drive positive change. A lot of support from individual MPs like Stephen Timms and others. But we also have this amazing 15,000 strong campaigns network who we will bring out and ask for their help to really put something on the agenda alongside us. And so they will take e-actions, they'll write to their MP, they'll just share their stories about what differences has made in their life in order to try and bring home the facts about the situation. And I thought I'd just share with you a very short video from one of our amazing campaigners who's been one of the faces of our pension credit campaign, Anissa, who shares the difference that pension credit has made to her. And I'm hoping someone will play that video.
My name is Anissa, and I'm 86 and 4 months. I started nursing in June 56 in a hospital in Surrey. At one time, I was helping to lift a patient from the theatre bed to an ordinary bed and cracked my back. Because I had no other income, I had to go to work, and the only remedy was to wear a steel corset. I officially retired, I think, at the age of 56 because I was in so much health problems. I really don't know why I got a lower pension. I was hungry sometimes, much in need of food that would be more healthy, but I couldn't buy it. I still bought the cheapest, whatever was available. It was very often a decision what to buy to eat, when to turn on the heating. And so instead of the heating, I would put more clothes on. I even wore a hat at night in order to keep myself warm, so that I can have another cup of tea or something to eat. Yes, it was that type of life ongoing. It wasn't until I was properly registered disabled with social services that they took notice of me. Pension credit, I've been receiving it for about 10 years, and I tell you, it's a whole new way of life. I could eat better, therefore be healthier. I could be warmer. It really changed my life because of the other benefits that I was able to accept with optician and dentist and tablets that I needed. Yeah, I started to live again. I expect there are many people today who don't know about pension credit. I really feel that the government needs to tell us older people what is available and what they are prepared to do for us. After all, they're going to be old one day.
And she's right. The government does need to do more. Government of any political colouring needs to do more, because actually that isn't right. We live in one of the richest nations, and people shouldn't be having to make those choices in later life. And a piece of research that we commissioned with the University of Loughborough highlighted that everybody who got pension credit, who was entitled to it, 450,000 people would be lifted out of poverty. That feels like a goal worth fighting for, even though it won't solve it all. We're under no illusion about that, but it could be a good step in the right direction. So, if this matters to you too, and there's stuff that you could share, do sign up to be a campaigner with us. It doesn't have to be arduous, but we need support to drive that positive change, because it all takes far too long. And as I think one of the slides said earlier, you know, time is precious and it's moving on apace, and people need help now, today. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you again for inviting me. You can get in touch with us. These are all of our links. You can, again, remember, call our phone line if we can be of any help to you or to someone you know. I'm going to have to rush off a little bit quickly after this event, sadly, because I have a board committee meeting. But I just wanted to highlight that we have a stand in the hall, and some of my fabulous colleagues are here today, and we've got representatives, we've got a couple of our advice workers here. There are also people from our campaigns team, our volunteering team, our fundraising team. Please go and say hello to them. They're a great bunch, and they'd love to hear about you and any thoughts and feedback you have. So thank you again.
Deborah, thank you so much for that, and thank you to you and your team for all the great work that you do. As Deborah said, she sadly won't be able to stay for lunch, but you have kindly agreed that if there are just a couple of questions that people would like to make from the audience, then Deborah would be very happy to take them now. We do have, I think, although I can't see them, we do have some roving mics in the audience, I believe. So if there are any questions for Deborah at this stage, please, if you could just raise your hands, that would be much appreciated. Lady over there at the top.
Thank you. Hello. I understand the need to explore the unclaimed benefits, and I know the focus on real poverty amongst many elderly people is really important. But there are some very poor people who actually do own their own property. I know it's been, a current sort of subject, but I wondered if Independent Age, if people contact them, if they know much about the what seems to me to be the biggest secret that the government has at the moment in this area, is NHS continuing healthcare, and how people get through the sort of maze of claiming it.
Yeah. So yes, so our advice team could certainly talk to somebody about that. It is one of the areas that we get questions and queries on. So we tackle all sorts of things around housing and suitable housing in later life, and also around health and things like continuing healthcare. So if you've got any questions now, do talk to a couple of the people that are on our desk.
Thank you. Just perhaps one more question, if there is one. Gentleman there.
I've been retired for quite a number of years now, and feel very grateful that LPFA been managing my retirement fund wisely and very prudently. But one thing I want to know is that with this new government's policy, about social care and taxation. How is our fund manager going to manage with it? That's one question. And the next question is that you appreciate that real estate investment is a very high risk undertaking. And recently in the Far East, there's so-called the Green Guard. Is it Green Guard? Or equivalent to Lehman Brothers. So as states collapse, how is it going to affect our future funding? Sorry. Thank you.
I think there's definitely questions for LPFA.
We will pick that up in the LPFA Q&A later on, but if there was just another question for Deborah. Gentleman at the front here.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Can I ask you, please, you said that the receiving pension credit is judged on means tested. And you put the figure, £177 for a single person and £270 for double.
That's
when
right.
you say means tested, what are that criteria? I mean, do they test the money in the bank or anything which we owe or we don't know? When they test by means, what sort of things they take into account, please?
So they're looking at all the money that's coming into your account. So, you know, whether that's from your retirement funds or what savings you have. So any savings under £10,000 are ignored, but then they basically count every £1,000 above that, and your amount that you'd receive in pension credit would come down. But I would suggest it's quite a technical area in terms of pension credit, but actually my lovely team do a lot of work supporting people to understand what would be eligible for that. And actually lots of people are surprised that they can have quite reasonable levels of savings and still be eligible for pension credit. So it's worth exploring it. So, do have a look. We also have a benefit checker on our website as well.
Yep. Okay, second thing, please.
Yep.
Receiving pension in the UK, if I move abroad,
yep,
would I keep receiving the pension being in abroad countries, please? Say in Pakistan?
Can I suggest you talk to my advice team who are here today? I think they'd be the best people to advise you appropriately on that. But if you're a UK citizen, most people will receive their pensions whichever country they're living in.
Thank you very much.
Deborah, thank you ever so much. I'm afraid we are going to have to allow Deborah to go. But Deborah, thank you ever so much. As she says, there are representatives of Independent Age outside in the foyer for any remaining questions that people have of that organisation. So, Deborah, thank you very much indeed once again. I'm going to move straight on now to a Q&A session for the panel. Conscious we had a question from up there, which I will come to in just a few minutes. But before I do, just a couple of general questions which we received beforehand. Probably the area that we've had the most questions about is about the impact of COVID and the pandemic on our organisation, both LPFA and LPP. So I think I will turn to each of our speakers in turn and just ask them to give their thoughts about what impact COVID and the pandemic has had on their respective organisations over the last few months. Robert.
Thank you, John. So very quickly, there was minimal impact within the fund. You were reassured to hear most staff had laptops, so we just immediately started working from home. We did some checks on our constitution and the technical abilities to hold committee and board meetings virtually, which was okay. So we've spent most of the 18 months working at home, but continuing business as usual, so there's been no real impact. In fact, I would probably say that John and I, for instance, have done quite a lot of recruitment. We interviewed over 50 individuals for 4 new board appointments to our board, and we did that remotely, and that worked pretty well. We are moving back to hybrid meetings, so it's a bit like today, some online and some in person, and we are returning to the office 1 to 2 days a week. So the actual impact has been rather limited for LPFA, certainly in a negative context. Thank you.
Joe.
Thank Thank you, John. Yes, it had quite a big impact on LPPA. So from a practical point of view, we didn't have lots of people with laptops, but they did have the facility, if they had IT equipment at home, to be able to remotely connect in. The biggest challenges for us to start with were post, because the post comes directly into the office and is sorted by people, and our telephony system that we had to support the help desk was not portable for home working. So we had to accelerate delivery of a telephony system that people could use at home. We put that in June after lockdown in March, but we still maintained a help desk service throughout the entire pandemic, which, you know, I know not many administrators did. So proud of the team for that too. Obviously, unexpected spikes in work. Every COVID wave, unfortunately, came with an increase in deaths for us to process. That has a knock-on effect on other work. But what we've also, we have evidence that that's also changed people's behaviours. So lots more people asking questions about retiring early and what their options are, because people have seen that we don't know what's around the corner, and thinking differently about their life choices. So there's been more work generated that way too. We're just returning to the office in Preston now. We're testing a sort of hybrid working. Obviously, the business needs come first. If we can align those with the way that our people want to work, then great. We're going to learn a lot, I think, over the next few months in terms of what works and how we adjust to new ways of working.
Thank you, Joe. And Richard.
Yeah, I'd echo many comments from Joe and Robert on that. We exactly for both other organisations moved to hybrid working, or remote working, I should say, last year. We had the scramble to get everyone laptops. I think we were probably somewhere in between in terms of team size. You know, our team's bigger than the LPFA's but smaller than Joe's, and we're probably somewhere in between in terms of technology capability. We got that bedded down within about a month, which meant some very, very, very long nights for our IT teams, but they got it done. Or long days, I should say, that split into nights. In the interim, then, I think we worked very effectively remotely. I think the things I'd learned, the positives, were it made people be more, what's the word I'm looking for, thoughtful about their communication. They had to be more intentional. They couldn't just rely on bumping into someone at the water cooler. They had to be more thoughtful about how they communicated with each other. So that had some significant positive impacts. People were more structured and more planned with their work at times. Although having said that, obviously some of the negatives, which are well publicised, maybe some of the isolation type issues, and working at home so this isn't unique to us, the same for everybody, depends on your personal circumstances. If you have a separate study or room, that's somewhat easier. If you have a dog that runs in all the time, that can be a problem, etc., etc. And the challenges we noted, I think the most acute were for people who were at the younger end of things in London, in shared houses, trying to work on a kitchen table, that type of thing. But that's the same for everybody. Roll forward to today, we've adopted a hybrid working approach, which thus far, touch wood, seems to be working very well. We're aiming for 2 to 3 days a week in the office for every member of staff, and as I say, it is working well. Things are back up and running. I would hope that's our steady state going forward, but if things don't work, as we evolve, we'll obviously adapt and change things.
And Joe, the other sort of major area of questions we had in the questions beforehand there were a lot of questions about people's personal financial position, people asking about, when would be the best time to retire and things like that, which of course is very difficult for us. So I thought it might be helpful for you just briefly to comment on that, if you would.
Yeah, thanks, John. There were lots of questions around what my pension options, can I retire early, what would my lump sum be? The administration business is not regulated to give financial advice, so we have to be very careful. We can point you in the direction of a financial advisor and those kinds of things. We can give you factual information, but we can't give you advice. So the website has lots of guides and things like that. There are also other useful sources like the LGA website and things like that. They will also include more detailed information about how your pension is calculated. It's not straightforward, I can tell you, in the main. There's also our help desk. You can call that when it's open Monday to Friday. There's lots of helpful people there who can give you advice too. We have a contact us form on our website where you just state the nature of your query and we can respond to that too. So there's lots of different ways to ask us questions, but pensions is complex, not just from a pensions itself, but from a tax point of view as well. So, you know, if you want really good pensions advice, you really should seek a good financial advisor.
Thank you, Joe. Gentleman up there asked us a question about, in two parts, firstly about the impact that the government social care proposals might have on pensions, and also about the sort of riskiness of real estate. Let me just try and take the first part of that. Dangerously, the impact of government policy, since we don't actually know what the policy is going to be in any detail yet. Subject to not knowing what the details are, I would not have expected that the policies in social care, if they're introduced, will have any impact on the LPFA pension. But we will, of course, have to wait and see what the proposals are. But I wouldn't anticipate that based on the things that have been in the press so far. But I'm afraid we can't say any more on that until we know more about what the detailed proposals will be. Richard, I don't know if you'd like to pick up on the real estate point.
Sure, and I think the question, I didn't quite catch all the question, but if I the bit that I did catch was talking about the risks in real estate. And I think it's a great, if I've interpreted that correctly, that's a great question, because it's something we've been looking at very carefully. But how I'd break it down is to think about real estate can be lots of different things. There's residential real estate, so the types of, obviously houses and flats and that type of thing. You have real estate like the building we're sat in, so event centres and that type of thing, hospitality you may call that. You have retail, you have offices, and you have things that you might call the infrastructure, warehouses and like to support the internet economy and delivery. So each of those has quite different characteristics and risk profiles, and I think the investment case for each of them has quite probably moved significantly in the last 2 years, and certainly the pricing has. So certainly I think it's, I wouldn't be telling anything you don't know, that you could argue that some of the high street assets are challenged. Retail, people haven't been going to big shopping centres. The value of some retail assets has fallen quite significantly. Have they hit a bottom? Don't know. Question mark there, but they're probably not so far from the bottom. But on the flip side, what we're seeing is the value of essentially dark warehouses that service internet retail, Amazon and the like, have rocketed in value. And we do own a fair few of those, to be frank. And if you look at our real estate portfolio versus an aggregate benchmark, roughly what others are holding, we own less retail and a lot more of those internet warehouse type assets. So actually, on a relative basis, we've done quite well in the last 12 to 18 months. We didn't foresee COVID, but we just have had concerns about retail. The portfolio also has residential assets. We talked about Millet Place earlier and the like. So to conclude, if the question is, are we paying attention to the risks and how the characteristics of property have changed through COVID? Absolutely. And we are migrating or rotating the portfolio in line with that.
Thank you. Open it up to the floor to any other questions. As I say, there are roving mics around. So are there any questions for the panel? Gentleman there.
On investment, in relation to the emissions target of net zero, can you explain what are the components, desirable and undesirable, that are taken into account in arriving at net zero? And can you give examples, please?
Richard.
I'll take that one. Oh, that's an interesting question. So we could talk about this all day. Part of the challenge with net zero, when we started talking about this a little while ago, is, well, can we even define what net zero means? And that is still an open debate. The journey that we're all on is there's this idea that the world needs to decarbonise. What does that really mean? How do you manage that? How do you make it practical? John and Robert talked about a 2030 interim target. What does that mean? The evolution that's taking place is, if you think about from a practical point of view, we've got the world in aggregate. It's not just us, this is everybody. The world needs to coalesce, governments, regulators, corporates, asset owners, to define what those metrics of success looks like. How do we get the data? How do we define what success looks like? But as you say, it's a very, very open question. I think what is clear is the direction of travel and what needs to be done, and it's simply reduce the carbon produced by the global economy, or by the world, over the next X periods, whether you say 2030, 2050. We're talking, currently we produce around about 50 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide a year. and that needs to come down significantly. There's all kinds of data which suggests the breakdown of that, but it's, you know, there are, it comes from many, many places. So it's going to be a long journey with significant complexity and uncertainty at this point, but the end point is clear about where we need to get to, but the route is still unknown. But the commitment, I would say, is very significant coming from governments, asset owners, corporates and the like. It's very hard not to see how this the momentum doesn't build significantly over the coming months, years, decades on that journey.
Thank you, Richard. There's a gentleman just next to Anastasia.
Thank you, Chairman. I would hope that you don't overlook hydrogen in the investment portfolio. Hydrogen is the only long-term solution. We're being given bad advice by the government and by the motor manufacturers as going to electric. We're short of electric power in the winter months in this country anyway. The only way you can have a hydrogen car is if you live in California or Japan. Hydrogen cars have been around for 10 years. The Germans are buying their technology from Toyota. It will be the next stage, but at the moment we have nothing in this country. Germany are investing heavily in hydrogen. All German trains will be driven by hydrogen within the next 2 years. We, as usual, are the dirty men of Europe, although I must say that, of course, Germany are still mining coal heavily. And I'm sad to hear, I'm sure the smart meter is a good investment, but smart meters are another area that the government are misleading us. They're absolutely worthless.
Thank you. Richard, I don't know if there's anything you want to...
No, I don't believe there's a question there. There's a series of statements, but yeah, absolutely. No, I certainly hear... I think what you're getting at is the difference between what you may say net zero 2030 and net zero 2050. The long-term strategic goal needs to be to decarbonise, and I think you're challenging whether EVs and that approach is how that interacts with the 2050 goal, and it's a tactical versus strategic. I think that it's a fair challenge. That's not what I would say is that certainly in terms of the role hydrogen plays long-term, it's not something we're discounting in the slightest. And in terms of the smart meter piece of that, I hear what you're saying. In terms of the underwrite that we put in place, that was very much in terms of looking at how do we invest in assets that make sense in our aggregate portfolio. And fundamentally, what we're investing for is in line with our fiduciary responsibility, which is the financial metrics that I laid out, which is funding the future, paying pensions today, in the context of the policies that we have at this point in time, and that investment fitted within all of that. So we aren't an impact investor, frankly.
Thank you, Richard. Tanaz, I think there's a gentleman next to you.
Yes, good afternoon. The world seems to be going towards net zero in 2050, but there seems to be increasing evidence that might be too late. The planet could be hostile to life by that stage. So will you wait for instructions from sort of world bodies to bring net zero forward, or might you make decisions off your own bat?
I'll take that one. The way I would describe it is that who knows if, as you say, if 2050 is the right answer. There's significant uncertainty around that. There's significant error in any climate modelling and the like. But I think the direction of travel is clear. The way I would describe this journey is it's a dynamic system and there's a feedback loop in there. So as things move, other things happen. So you're not acting in isolation. So my strong suspicion would be, and as I described earlier, that how do I put this? The assets we buy will be impacted by market pricing. Market pricing will move way in advance of regulation because it'll look forward to what's happening. So as the indicators, metrics, and direction of travel of either policy or degradation of the planet accelerates, if it does, market pricing of assets will start reflecting that very, very quickly. And that will then feed back into how we manage the portfolio. So whilst net zero 2050 is an aspiration, we certainly, as thoughtful investors, who are, as I say, running a portfolio to deliver the outcomes that we're looking for in terms of the financial metrics, aligned with the policies and that direction of travel, would be reacting well in advance of that, because we need to protect capital. There's no point owning an asset today if it's going to be worthless in 3 years because no one wants to buy it. So I would argue that these things will become patently clear through our management activities, way in advance of any big picture change.
Thank you, Richard. I think, Anastasia, you have a lady up there.
I'd just like to ask a question that will affect most of your members. My husband's just retired. We were looking at the facts and figures and trying to plan our future. It's all very well looking at these lovely videos of people enjoying life, going on holiday and doing everything. If, by any chance, your partner does die, you'll probably, like us, get a terrible shock when you look at the facts and figures. The government, it appears, I have asked this question, reduces the surviving partner's pension enormously. I certainly would not be able to stay in the home I had enjoyed and planned for. I will probably not be able to eat very much. You see this poor widow starving there, drawing pension supplement. I won't be able to treat my children to holidays and things. I will not be able to live. I was answered by, well, it's government policy to reduce the surviving spouse's pension. This will affect everybody. It's immediate. I want to know, you as a very powerful organisation, are you doing anything about this? You mentioned earlier you were fighting to get the husband's contribution raised. Well, any surviving spouse is going to be affected. What is happening about this? Are you fighting the government? It isn't fair. You've supported somebody all their working life, and you're going to be left with nothing. Could you, tell me, what are you doing about this?
I mean, thank you very much for the question, and I obviously, all of us here would be incredibly sympathetic to the position. Sadly, that is, and I don't mean to sound like I don't care about it, but that is beyond our bailiwick. I mean, our responsibility is to make sure that the pension that members of our fund receive is paid to them. The question that you've raised, perfectly understandably, relates to government policy, and sadly the government doesn't consult us on the policy they make about the way in which they affect pensions. There are, as Deborah was saying, a number of charities and organisations who do make it and have it as part of their responsibility to lobby the government, and therefore I think Deborah would be, and her charity Independent Age would be a perfect place for you to contact to talk about these issues, because they have the ability to influence government in a way that, frankly, sadly, we don't. Are there other questions? We probably have time for just one more. Gentleman here.
One of the slides showed the participation of LPFA in company board meetings and influencing decisions and so on. One thing that's always irked me is the stories I read in the papers about very favourable executive remuneration packages, which tend to go through on the nod because institutional investors tend to just vote in favour of the resolution. A couple of recent examples, well, perhaps not quite so recent now, Persimmon Group, where there was a massive payout, and more recently, Sports Direct, or the company which runs that, the son-in-law of the present owner of the company, or chief executive or whatever, is to receive a massive welcoming package. It's just trying to find out, what the attitude of the LPFA is regarding these company matters, which obviously come up at board meetings, shareholders meetings, annual general meetings, as to is the LPFA an active investor in this respect?
Richard, absolutely.
I'm very happy to take that one. So, to the final question, absolutely. LPPI, we have an ESG policy, so environmental, social, governance. So this would fall under the G, so the governance component. It's something we take very seriously. Within the equity portfolio, there's certainly the element that we manage directly. So I'm talking about the element of the global equities that LPPI manages directly. We take that governance component very seriously. So we look at the total, the aggregate of the company, and we will engage. And if we have concerns around the governance of a company, it's highly unlikely we won't even be investing. If we are investing in the company and we feel that there are matters that we aren't comfortable with, we will vote actively and aggressively on that. It's something we take seriously. So executive compensation is part of that governance piece. So we shouldn't talk specific names, but let's just say some of the names you've mentioned, I think it's highly unlikely we would ever be a shareholder in for reasons of concerns around corporate governance, because it's one of the things we take very seriously in the companies we invest in.
Thank you, Richard. I'm afraid we've run out of time for any more questions, but all of the speakers will be in the lobby afterwards. If anybody does have any questions we haven't been able to answer, please either come up and ask us or speak to, if it's on the administration side, any of the LPPA representatives. Can I just therefore thank you all for coming, both those here in the hall and those online. It's been a fantastic experience for us to actually be able to get back to seeing our members in person again. We really did miss this last year. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your participation and your attention. And we look forward to seeing you again next year. Thank you very much indeed.